Record on this one.
There you go. Yeah, you got it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am very glad that you came today for our program. We are very pleased and honored to have also with us Chris Woolf. Before we start our program, I would like to say several words about him. Chris Woolf was a broadcast journalist with the BBC World Service for 34 years. He worked in London, Afghanistan, and Southern Africa, but mostly in the United States, where he became news editor for public radio's main international news show, The World. He was on air for many years as the show's history guy. In addition to writing, Woolf also runs a professional voiceover company, The Voice Depot. In his spare time, he researches and writes history and explores family history. His passion is seeking the truth, whether in journalism, history, or genealogy. He served in the UK's territorial army as an infantry soldier during the Cold War. He now lives in the US. So today we present a new book by Chris Woolf. The book is about Afghanistan. It's called Bumbling Through the Hindu Kush, a memoir of fear and kindness in Afghanistan. And now I will give word to Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Liana. Thank you very much for that introduction.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So we're all ears. We're going to listen to you, please.
Very good. Hello, and thank you all for zooming in. As Liana said, I'm Chris Woolf, and I'm author of Bumbling Through the Hindu Kush, a memoir of fear and kindness in Afghanistan. And my goal for our time together this afternoon is threefold. To tell you a little bit about myself and my experiences there, to give you a little background about who was shooting at who and why, and to answer your questions about anything related to Afghanistan, including affairs there today. If a question does occur to you during my talk, just jot it in the chat box. So let's get cracking on the journey. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me 1 second. Share.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that if you have questions, you can also raise your hand. We have reactions here, so we are not such a huge crowd. We can all, share your questions.
Very good. So you can all see that now, I hope?
Yes, wonderful.
That's the opening shot. So the book is essentially the story of my visit there during the fighting in 1991. But it's also, I hope, a great introduction to the country and its history. Let's see, how's this not working? There we go. So I was working for the BBC World Service, as Liana mentioned, as I did for 34 years up until summer of last year. And I went to Afghanistan to further my career, among other reasons. But I'll come to that in a moment. It was only a short trip, just under 2 weeks, but it was transformative. It changed my life in ways I couldn't imagine. It was traumatic. It's taken me a long time to come to terms with it all, and writing the book has been part of that. But despite the trouble, I've remained a lifelong friend of Afghanistan. I've kept in touch with affairs there through my career in international news and kept in touch with its people. I've been flattered with compliments from Afghans and Afghan experts that my book has some great insights into the history and culture there. I was the history guy for the public radio program The World for 7 years, and I'm told I became quite good at explaining the historical context behind current affairs in a way that was accessible, but without dumbing it down or sounding patronizing. But I'll let you be the judge of that. Anyway, the other reason I think my book is accessible is that I wrote it at the request of my daughter, Ellen, pictured here, for posterity, really. I'll say she's put me in the grave early, but she certainly asked me to get it down before my memories start to fade. And it was great to have her in mind as I was writing, as I know that she knows nothing about Afghanistan or war or even journalism. And so I try and bring everyone along on the journey because it's so complicated that it's tough for people to understand who's shooting at who. And we'll get to that in a sec. And finally, the book was a great opportunity to share my knowledge about Afghanistan's history, geography, and culture. But why should you care? Well, even though it was a long time ago, what happened all those decades ago is hugely relevant at this moment in time, so that we can understand what's happened in Afghanistan in the last few months and what might happen now. Afghans and experts have been kind enough to tell me that I have some great insights, as I mentioned, into Afghanistan's life and culture. And I think that was because of my situation. I was outside the wire, as they say in the military. In fact, I was speaking to a veteran with 2 tours under her belt in Afghanistan just a few weeks ago. And she said, well, I think you've seen more of the country than you did on your short visit than I did my entire time there on her 2 tours, since I was stuck on the base the whole time, she said. So I was outside and exposed to all the risks and dangers, and also all the kindnesses you can encounter when you're in a country like this. And I was very honest about my feelings, about how I've coped with them over the years. One reviewer actually called the book emotionally brave. So it might give you some insight into trauma as well. But I have to be humble as well, because what I went through was really only a taste of war, a taste of fear. And so what our veterans, for example, go through, what I went through pales in comparison to what our veterans went through, and what people who simply live in countries like this or are working there for other reasons, or what I call real war correspondents. What they go through is very demanding on the body and on the mind. And so I try and be humble about how my experiences were really only a fraction of what some people go through. So why did I go? Now, some people say there's semester abroad and there's what the heck were you thinking? So I wanted I was at that point in my career where I'd been with the BBC World Service for a few years, and I wanted to see if I would like the life of a foreign correspondent. I had enough experience to start applying for jobs like that. And so it wasn't a complete lark. I went to see if I would like that life for the next step of my career. Then I was curious about Afghanistan because I'm older than I look, and I grew up on maps like this, which is something you would see very commonly in the UK when I was a kid. And of course, it's the British Empire with everything painted pink. And I was fascinated that this remote country had been able to resist the might of the British Empire, not once, but 3 times. What you're seeing here is the last stand of the British expedition in the first Afghan war, which was wiped out with only 1 man escaping back in the 1840s. And the other reason I went, apart from it being good for my career, to satisfy my curiosity, was to catch up with my friend, Chris Bowers, who was the BBC correspondent stationed in Kabul. And so he invited me along, and I thought, well, what a great opportunity to see get all those things squared away. So who am I? Well, I was a soldier, as Liana mentioned, just a part-time soldier in the British equivalent of the National Guard. I'm in the front row there somewhere. And if that's not the face of a trained killer, I don't know what is. I was lucky enough, my wife hates it when I say, I was the first person in my family and from my secondary school to go to university. And I was lucky enough to go to Cambridge University, as I found a mentor in the 6th form of school who helped me prepare and apply for that. And I was graduated, of course, in history, and not knowing what to do afterwards, I ended up joining the BBC as a researcher. And this is the headquarters of the BBC, or was the headquarters of the BBC World Service in London, very imposing building with the motto, "Nation shall speak peace unto nation." There's me in the newsroom at the tea trolley, which was where the focus of life sometimes in the morning. So Afghanistan, where is it? For those of you who may not be aware, Afghanistan's right in the center of this map, which is West Asia in 1991. You can see the Soviet Union dominating the area to the north. They have a common border of several hundred miles. You can just about see the UK in the north, in the upper left corner of the map. So that gives you a little bit of orientation about where Afghanistan sits. And the thing to know about Afghanistan is it's an incredibly diverse territory. The dominant feature is the mountains, the Hindu Kush Mountains, which is an extension of the Himalaya in India and China and Nepal. And it forms this spine, as it were, across the country from east to west of several hundred miles, pretty much dividing the country into two regions, north and south, with only one real road of commercial value that passes through the mountains. So obviously a very strategic lifeline, and one I saw firsthand. But it's not just mountains, there's deserts, and of course very fertile valleys as well. That there you can see is in fact Mujahideen cavalry, the rebel soldiers fighting the communist regime. But we'll come to that in just a second. Because besides the complexity of the geography, there's the complexity of the people. Now, there's not going to be a test on this at the end, but hopefully you can see here, just get a flavor of the variety of peoples that live in Afghanistan. This is the colors correspond to the language group that's dominant in each district. But of course, it's not a simple jigsaw puzzle. It's a kaleidoscope, because there are minorities in every district, and minorities divided by language, divided by religion, divided by ethnicity. There's a very large visible minority in Afghanistan, the Hazara, with a much more Mongolian-looking physiognomy, face, so they stand out from the rest of the country, and they've suffered as a result of that. Now, there's a myth that Afghanistan hasn't changed since medieval times, that in a sense, it's a country that's somehow frozen in time. And this is a terrible myth. I'm going to show you some pictures from the 1960s and 70s of Kabul back in those decades, before the current set of civil wars began. And it pretty much looks like any city in Asia at the time. There's a mix of traditional clothing and a mix of very modern clothing. Even before the Soviet intervention, there was a huge diversity of outlooks on life at that time. And so you can see there's the countries divided into people who wear Western clothes and the people in traditional clothes. And the people in the Western clothes had their own set of problems, in that some look to Moscow as the model for the development of their country in terms of building a socialist centralized system of government. And others look to Washington and the West for their vision of the future. And obviously those are mutually exclusive visions during the Cold War. And what's worse was both sets of those people, the educated elites, failed to understand or bring along the rest of the country, which did remain much more rural, religious, and conservative. So as we saw from the map, Afghanistan is right in Moscow's backyard, sharing, as I said, hundreds of miles of border. So in a sense, it's even more in Moscow's backyard than, say, Cuba is in Washington's. So obviously, the Russians had a very deep interest in what was happening in Afghanistan. And the intervention didn't come out of the blue and had strong indigenous roots. There was a large number of Afghans who were interested in moving the country in the direction of Soviet-style development. And they joined with other people who wanted to change the country in a coup in 1973 to overthrow the king and establish a republic. But the key date to remember, the date when everything changed in Afghanistan is 1978, because that's the year that the long peace in Afghanistan ended. Before I get to that, it's an interesting, Afghanistan's governments did a very good job of trying to maintain their neutrality through the Cold War, despite the Washington and Moscow trying to win their influence. So there's a ring road that pretty much passes around Afghanistan in a circle, linking up all the major cities, called Highway 1. And different sections were built by different countries. So it's about half built by the Russians and half built by the Americans. And the president, Daoud Khan, the last president of the 1970s, said, "I like to light my American cigarettes with Russian matches," as a way to try and convey how he would like to maintain that balance. But that changed in 1978 because Daoud Khan, he was seen by the communists as, they came to believe that he was about to purge them and arrest them en masse. So they staged a coup of their own, and in what became known as the Sawa Revolution, seized power. And so in effect, the communists seized power and the people rebelled, and the killing hasn't stopped. The communists may have had a chance if they could stay united, but they didn't. One faction turned on another. And in 1979, the communists started fighting amongst themselves. Moscow's man was killed, and a faction opposed to, not opposed to Moscow, but less close to Moscow, came to power. And as a consequence, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan just after Christmas, 1979, to try to restore their vision for the future of Afghanistan. And they met what can only be described as a holy war. Diverse groups of anti-communist rebels rallied around their Islamic faith and became known as the Mujahideen, the warriors of God. And Afghanistan became the Soviet version of the Vietnam War. This is a picture of young Soviet troops with their Afghan interpreters and allies on patrol. The United States, of course, through the CIA and Pakistan, supported the Mujahideen. Now, the Russian occupation lasted for 9 long years and ended in 1989. This is the last convoy crossing the so-called Peace and Friendship Bridge into Uzbekistan at a place called Termez. And so the parallels and contrasts to today are extraordinary. The Russians left behind a friendly regime that was much more competent than the one left behind by the United States. The Mujahideen attempted to seize power by force, just like the Taliban, and to the surprise of the world, they failed for 3 years. So what we see here is the situation that prevailed during this stalemate. The areas colored red are the areas controlled by the communist government, left behind by the Soviet Union. And it may not look like much, but it's the bulk of the population, all the major cities and the most fertile areas of the country. And you can see the ring road looping around the heart of the country that I mentioned just a while back. So this was when I decided to go to Afghanistan. As you can see, I was young and handsome once, but well, let's put the emphasis on young. I wasn't really expecting much in the way of danger. Yes, the capital city was occasionally being shelled by the rebels. But I thought, when I said to my friend, I'd love to see more of the country than just the capital, that we would fly from one safely held government city to another. Now, the problem with flying is one illustrated here. So I don't know if there's any veterans among you who is taking place here, but that is Ariana's last airline. So Ariana is the national airline of Afghanistan. The only other plane they had that was serviceable was damaged by a mortar strike the week before I arrived at Kabul airport. And this was the plane that I'd flown in the day before, and I was shocked to see it coming back the next day doing this, which is dropping flares in pairs, which is the way that you decoy heat-seeking missiles from destroying your plane, which is obviously a terrifying prospect. So we weren't going to fly, so my friend got us to hitch a ride with a humanitarian aid convoy. And as soon as we set out from Kabul, we ran into trouble with, alarming consequences that you can read more of in the book. But just to give you some highlights, there's millions of landmines scattered across Afghanistan. These are small anti-personnel mines. There's the danger of rocket attacks. There's checkpoints with armed men that you can't really tell which side they're on. I remember driving along the road after we'd gotten through the first spot of violence, and was wondering, well, when are we going to go through enemy-controlled territory, rebel-controlled territory? And they said, Chris, you've already been through several checkpoints already that have been manned by the rebels, but you can't tell because if they're not in government army uniforms, the pro-government militia is indistinguishable from the rebels in the countryside. And then the other tragic face of Afghanistan in the year that I was there was the devastation. And you may have all heard the phrase in a history book about an area being laid waste. Well, this is what it looks like. The strategic pass that I mentioned through the mountains, the Hindu Kush Mountains, goes through a pass called the Salang Pass, and the Soviet Union had built a tunnel through it. And for 50 miles either side of the tunnel, the countryside had been laid waste. And the justification was Chairman Mao, the Chinese revolutionary leader, coined the phrase that the guerrilla must be a fish swimming in the water. So the Soviets thought, well, we don't want guerrillas, so let's drain the river. And they depopulated the entire valley, as I mentioned, 50 miles either side of the tunnel. Every village, the communist forces went house to house, forcing people out. And it's very eerie to go that many miles and not see a single person or any sign of life in the field other than military presence. No goats, no herds of animals, not even a dog left, and the carefully terraced hill fields abandoned. And we spent, and then of course there's the terrifying mountain passes with all kinds of trucks, as you can see here. There's one that's freshly gone off the side of the cliff on the ice or from ambush. But besides all the terrors, and as I mentioned, the book is called subtitled A Memoir of Fear and Kindness in Afghanistan. The kindness was overwhelming. This was a kind doctor who sheltered us up in the north for several days, working for the International Red Cross. But another time we were stuck in no man's land. You may have an idea of the sense of no man's land from, a war movie or something like, or from your own reading. But we were literally stuck with shells and machine guns going over our heads in both directions. And, we were obviously little concerned, but this farmer took us in, no questions asked, sheltered us, and then fed us without asking any questions or any favors. He wouldn't take any money for his time or his trouble. And putting himself and his family at risk of retaliation, because sheltering foreigners, obviously, if the wrong side came along, could be have dramatic consequences. So even though it was terrifying, I still was bowled away with the kindness and generosity and hospitality of the people that we met. Now, among the other people that we met, there were some amazing, perhaps famous characters. most well-known perhaps is the warlord, the rebel warlord, Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was one of the best, arguably one of the best generals of the 20th century, in that he galvanized a militia of students and peasants based to resist and withstand 9 full division level assaults by the Red Army of the Soviet Union in the Panjshir Valley. An incredible achievement when you think about it, that they only had the primitive weapons of light, rifles, light machine guns, and some anti-tank weapons. So an incredible achievement to withstand that level of assault. But perhaps, and he was a very interesting character. I'm happy to ask any questions, take any questions about him, if you have them. Equally interesting is this man, who's looks like a mujahideen. He was a mujahideen. In fact, he was Ahmad Shah Massoud's bodyguard. His birth name was Nikolai Bystrov, and he came from the southern Russian city of Krasnodar and had been sent to Afghanistan as a conscript, had been captured while out on patrol in 1982, just outside of Bagram Air Base, and had seen his friends killed, but he was taken by Massoud, who had a more generous attitude towards taking prisoners than some of the other warlords in Afghanistan. His life was spared, along with another man that we met in a different incident. And eventually he became Muslim and did in fact join the Mujahideen out of personal loyalty to Massoud. So he's a fascinating character you can get to meet in the book as well. So that brings us to the point where I'd like to read a small excerpt from my book that hopefully sets the scene for the situation going on when I went to Afghanistan. And we can talk about what happens next and what's happened since in the questions if you want to afterwards. But let me just read the prologue to the book, as I think it helps give you a sense of my writing and the kind of things that we went through. So it's after lunch by the time the white 4-ton truck of the United Nations rolls into town. The letters UN are painted loudly in blue on the side and front. It's a comforting sight. Maybe we will get back to Kabul before the snows close the mountain passes. The driver pulls up to my buddy and me. The dust settles. It's Osman. There he is. And he's clearly unhappy. I'm not sure if he's been on private business or what, but I get the impression he's been sent to pick us up against his will. We're unable to communicate. He speaks no English, and we don't speak enough Dari. There's no interpreter to help us clear the air. I can feel the tension, but I'm not sure of its source. I know it will make for an uncomfortable ride, 2 days or more. I could be wrong, but it feels like the trust between us is breaking down. There's no time to worry. It's already late and we're a long way from our destination. We can't be on the road at night, far too dangerous. We grab our packs and hop up into the cab of the truck, next to Osman. My buddy gets in first and sits in the middle. I follow and take my place by the door. Life in wartime is a lottery of simple decisions about who sits where. I don't know exactly where we are or the route we'll be taking. We have no paper maps. And of course, Google Maps are a thing of the future. We just have to trust Osman. As we drive out of town, I can't help thinking how different I feel now compared to the beginning of our road trip just a week ago. I've lost my innocence and sense of wonder. I've seen so much blood and felt a degree of fear and helplessness that I've never felt before. I'm anxious to get home. At the back of my mind, I'm a little concerned for my safety, thinking how Mum would take any bad news, or whether anyone would ever even know if something happened to us out here in the violent heart of Central Asia. At the front of my mind, I'm feeling more pressure to get back to work in London on time and to simply reassure my wife and family that I'm still alive. Add to all that this new, unexplained tension with Osman. Despite all these unspoken anxieties, there's a tremendous sense of relief that we've finally begun the journey home. I push the dark thoughts away and concentrate on the scenery. The snow-capped mountains of the Hindu Kush lie on the horizon. In front of us and all around us is a giant dusty plain. This part of Afghanistan looks like the Star Wars desert planet Tatooine, at least at this season of the year. I've traveled a fair deal in Europe, Africa, and India, but this looks and feels thoroughly alien to everything I've ever experienced. You can see fields and meadows that might bloom green after the spring floods, but now, on the eve of winter, green is just a memory. Everything is dusty, dry, brown, or khaki. The homes, made from adobe, are the same. Their flat roofs and small windows evoke images from childhood Bible stories or of Tuscan raiders. There are few people to be seen, not much life at all besides the occasional herd of goats. The rebel checkpoints come and go. If the armed men wave us down, we slow to a crawl and lean out of the window, shouting, Muli Matahid, United Nations in Dari. Usually it works, but sometimes we have to show our papers. We're traveling alone, not in a convoy, so we seem to be getting flagged down more often than not. I'm grateful that we're in a UN truck with bona fide papers. I can't imagine how we'd get through without them. For our driver Osman, the checkpoints are clearly getting tiresome. He starts to tisk and mutter at the delays. Up ahead, we see a kid, a goat herder. My guess is he's 13 or 14. His clothes are a little ragged. His sandaled feet are caked white with dust. His unkempt mop of black hair is also speckled with dust. He has life and death in his hands, in the form of an ancient-looking AK-47. He's flagging us down, but he seems to be alone. There's no roadblock. His goats are off to the side of the road. Osman tisks. My buddy urges him to slow down, but Osman has had enough of delays. I get the sense he thinks this is one checkpoint we can afford to ignore. He curses and pushes down on the accelerator. I gasp. As we fly by, I can see the kid pulling the weapon up to his shoulder. He opens fire. And so you're going to have to read the book if you want to find out what happens next, but not to give away the ending, I'm still here. So anyway, a dramatic incident in an amazing country. Liana, that just about wraps up my presentation. I would say if you want to buy the book, you can find it on my website, chriswoolfbooks.com, or on Amazon, or wherever you buy books. And I would like to add that I don't like the idea of profiting from difficult experiences, so I am donating 10% of all the proceeds from the book, not profits, all the proceeds, to two charities. One is the Halo Trust, which is a demining charity that some of their workers helped save my life and gave me an education in how to live in a world full of mines. And the other is a charity called the Enabled Children Initiative, which is helping disabled Afghan children. Both charities are still working despite the change in the regime in Afghanistan this year. And so if you're interested and like my story, you can know that some of the money will be passed on to those two very worthy causes. So with that, back to you, Liana, and happy to take your questions.
Yes, thank you so much. It was very interesting, and you selected very good this part of your story, intriguing, and ending with intriguing question, what's happening. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm wondering if you had a post-traumatic stress disorder, if you're willing to answer this personal question as a result of all this traumatizing experience you had over there.
Thank you. I don't think I would add the D. I definitely had. I do describe a little bit at the end of the book my trouble I had with nightmares for several years afterwards, and jitteriness, irritability, but it was never disabling. And I think that's the key difference. You can have a traumatic experience and suffer stress from it, but it never stopped me working. I could usually get back to sleep. You know, there were some times where I was drinking more than was healthy for me to try and cope with it all, but it wasn't disabling to that extent. So I hope it would give people a sense of just how hard it is to come back for people who serve in places like this, as either in the military or as diplomats or aid workers, or even for the poor people who live and are brought up in these very hostile environments.
Yeah, so you had resilience. You're resilient persons, which is wonderful. I read about that in the book recently. I read that some people, they have as a result disorders, but many people, majority of them, they are doing okay. Even they had, like you said,
yes,
nightmares or anything, but they can survive this terrible experience. And I also wanted to ask you, do you still keep relationship with some people you met in Afghanistan? Still before some friendship or attachment formed of the local people?
The local people, no, unfortunately not anybody that I met on that trip. Tragically, the very kind man who was acting as our fixer and interpreter died in a plane crash in 1993, just 18 months after the visit. And other people I have not been able to reconnect with, but I can tell you that Nikolai, the Ahmad Shah Massoud's bodyguard, continued to work with him until 1995. And it's an interesting story. He has been interviewed by Russia Today and other outlets in the former Soviet Union wanting to know his story. And it's interesting that and I was very pleased to learn that his conversion to Islam was sincere, because I was interviewing him through an interpreter who worked very closely with the Mujahideen, that he wasn't able to speak freely. And so I was always anxious that, oh my gosh, what was his real story? But he was a sincere convert. And what's the most interesting twist to the tale is that he ended up marrying an Afghan woman who was a devout communist. She had worked very hard for the party and for the government in Afghanistan. And so it must be very difficult for their children. They have 3 children, I believe, trying to figure out, you've got the Afghan who's the devout communist and the Russian man who's become a devout Muslim. It's just like very, not what you would expect.
Do you know that he stayed in Afghanistan, so he never returned to
So
Russia?
His wife was wounded in the shelling of Kabul during the Civil War, and they had a miscarriage. And when she got pregnant again, there were complications. And so Ahmad Shah Massoud arranged for him to come back to the Soviet Union, to Russia, as it then was. So he went home to Krasnodar for the birth of their child. And by coincidence, at that time, the Taliban seized power. Massoud was chased back into the mountains. And so Islamuddin, Nikolai, couldn't get back to Afghanistan. So he has remained in Krasnodar and now works with the Russian government he does travel back to Afghanistan in recent decades, the last 20 years, to look for other former POWs and or their remains to bring them back to the motherland.
Thank you so much. I see there is a question from one of my colleagues from another branch. He's the head of another branch. So
hey.
Please.
Chris, thank you very much.
You know what? Even though I lived next to the Afghanistan, that is Pakistan,
Hmm.
so I know the history of Afghanistan very well, and I know the people of Afghanistan very well.
Hmm.
So even though I had many questions, but you know what? If someone asks you about your book, I mean, there are so many books written on Afghanistan. What makes your book different, and why should I buy this book? But before you answer that question, I can add one more question in that. That you know what, watching. I don't know how long you've been watching Afghanistan, but I am personally watching Afghanistan, I will say, for last 45 years. So every news I'm watching, I'm listening and everything, the invasion of Russians and the invasion of Americans and their allies, I say that there's a zero achievement. And to me, just reading and looking at the stats, the Russian invasions, Afghanis, they were killed. 562,000 Afghanis got killed in Russian invasion. And if you count, also add the refugees that went to Pakistan, Iran, and different countries, it looks like to me as a neighbor, they made really mess in Afghanistan, where people have no hope, no vision, no life, nothing at all left there. So, so even though the books were written, but I don't know how the history will judge these two superpowers. What did they achieve after invading decades and decades? In the end, the Afghan people's life did not change. And the way I saw them, they were tribes, they were living in caves. And if I go today, I can see them living in caves. So I don't think that they believe in American democracy, that the way the American live, the way the British live. They have their own way of living. And if someone wants to change them, I think they are misconcept, and I don't think that they could do anything. I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Well, there's a vast range of things to discuss there. Let me start with your first question, which what makes my book different to anyone else's. I think that so many books are written up. They're written to try and impress academics. They're trying to impress policymakers and trying to show off their knowledge. And so you get a lot of inaccessible, what I call alphabet soup, a lot of confusing titles and too many names for people to keep track of. And I'm quite proud of my record as the history guy for public radio in making complex situations accessible. So I hopefully will give people, readers, in the way I introduce the history and culture and geography, just enough information to follow along with the story, which is I think the most important thing, and I'm not trying to overwhelm or impress people with my personal knowledge and expertise. So that, and I'm very humble in the way that I talk about my experiences, and I'm very open about the impact of some of the traumatic and some of the wonderful things that happened along the way. So I like to think of it as a more honest book and hopefully informative. So in fact, the first person to read my manuscript was an Afghan, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't insensitive. And Kais Akbar Omar, quite well-known author, was very kind enough to tell me that he found it gripping as well as informative. So that's why I think my book stands out. In terms of like what has the foreign intervention achieved, I think you're right in that it's there aren't many positive things to point to, but I would also remind people that Afghans aren't just victims, that they are playing a very active part in taking control of their own lives and trying to direct the country in their own direction. For example, like the communist movement was an indigenous movement among a section of the Western, of the educated elite. And the Taliban is an indigenous movement. They have, obviously, as most people are aware, a strong relationship with the Pakistani intelligence. But I don't think it's correct to say that they're simply a tool or an extension of Pakistani intelligence. I think they have indigenous roots too in the traditional culture of part of the country amongst the Pashtun people. But I also think it's too simplistic to say nothing was achieved. For example, my analysis is that the Taliban regime is unsustainable and that it may not be for many years, perhaps decades. But I think there are so many constituencies now that are alive and active in Afghanistan. I'm thinking of the women, the educated, the urban population, which is much more, obviously much larger and much more educated, and all the minorities. Those forces together will, in time, I'm quite confident, force an accommodation with the Taliban to create a more inclusive country, if Afghanistan can be left to its own devices. And I think that's the critical question. Will outside powers leave Afghans to find their own way? So obviously, and you may not have seen in the news today, there was fighting along the border with Iran, Iranian border guards fighting Taliban regime soldiers, and with several killed on both sides. So, that's just an example of how the neighbors may not leave Afghanistan alone. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. All right. But you know what? I think that I like the title of the book, and it's the title looks like that it's a very clever and very intelligently given that title. It looks very attractive.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I again, if you know what, if I read this book, for example,
Yep.
Most of the Mujahideens at that time, most of them either they're old or they passed away. So if a person who's alive today, they are more interested in today's history, what happened after 9/11, how Americans and their allies went into Afghanistan. What did they do? I mean, to past, it's okay, it's good. But to me, if I have to see, I want to read it, the latest news, or latest memoir, or something latest that's happened there, rather than in the past. I'm not sure on that.
Yeah. Well, it was, I can't help you. It was difficult for me to write. The book's only just come out last month. And so obviously it was a little traumatic, and it's taken me many years to find the time and the personal, I guess, courage or energy to get it out of my system, to deal with, to delve back into those terrifying moments and to get it out of my system. So don't think I could have written it any sooner. But I think the way it can help inform your understanding of Afghanistan today is the examples of how loyalty is so malleable. Yes, the individuals maybe have died, but the culture remains that for many Afghans, the idea of being Afghan is a secondary one to their primary loyalty, which is going to be local and possibly transient, in that you have shifting layers of loyalty, either to, as you mentioned, clans and tribes in parts of the country, but the kinship group is always going to be the primary focus of loyalty. Beyond that, there may be your local language group or your valley, so it may be geographic, or it could be religious, in that many Afghans belong to different sects. For example, the Ismailis are very much devoted to their peers, their khans. And so countering that, which was what unfortunately most American people who were deployed there over the last 20 years never got to do, was just to realize just how it's more than just a mosaic. It's a kaleidoscope of shifting loyalties. And I'm hoping people can read through my stories and understand the way that that works. It's not a comprehensive guide, but it gives you illustrations of how, at night, two sides could be fighting each other, and the next morning they have breakfast together because of those different degrees of competing loyalty that shift very quickly. And, I think that kind of insight is helpful to people understand, how complex that country can be.
One last question, and that's it.
Thank you.
I don't know if you mentioned it or not in your book that at one point these Mujahideens were invited in White House and they had taken pictures with President Reagan, and in the next decade, all these becomes terrorists and they were become the blacklist under Americans. So it's looked like a change, everything got changed.
Yeah, so it's, I have my own personal, I was a former soldier in NATO during the Cold War, part-time soldier, but still took the oath to fight if there was a conflict. And I'd been brought up on all the news, how the communists were the bad guys and the rebels were the good guys. And then suddenly to meet, as I mentioned in the book, there's a chapter called The Woman on the Bridge, where I might just meet an ordinary woman going about her business, that she's a friend of my translator. She's got her hair down, she's got jewelry, she's got makeup, she's got a business suit on. She's going to work in an office like any woman in the West anywhere. And it was like, wait, if the rebels actually win, this woman's going to have to either flee or start wearing a burqa. But they're supposed to be on our side. And so even then in 1991, I was starting to see like problems with the news message, you could call it propaganda, that we'd been brought up on. So I could see that myself at that time already. And but it's not true that they all became these murderous terrorists. Many of the factions that were in the Mujahideen fought against the Taliban very hard for a very long time and became the focus of these groups in turn became the focus of the Northern Alliance that helped the United States overthrow the Taliban in 2001. And it's also most interesting to note perhaps that Ahmad Shah Massoud himself was the last remaining champion of the anti-Taliban resistance, to the point that Al-Qaeda tried again, and this time succeeded in assassinating him just 2 days before the attacks on the United States on 9/11, and obviously on New York. And they knew that the US would retaliate, and they thought, well, the best way to get a step ahead of our enemy is to take out the person they're going to turn to first to lead their counterattack. And so, yes, some of the rebels were radicalized and became terrorists that have threatened America and its allies and its neighbors for years. But obviously that's not true of all the Afghans that were in the White House meetings that you mentioned.
Thank you.
This is why I say the truth is always more complicated than the myths we grew up on.
Yeah, I also wanted to add something while you're answering Zahid's previous questions, two previous questions. I think that even though you write about things that passed, it's a post-past war, not recent events, but still the problem with contemporary culture is that many people don't know anything beyond this point when they are now. So they don't remember what happened 30, 40 years, not saying even 100 years ago. So this, in this case, any information is useful is from an informative point of view. It's informative, and another point is that as a writer, you have complete freedom to choose any piece, piece
Of
of your
course.
size or someone's pastoral, whatever you want about. Like,
Yes.
I just thought about Leo Tolstoy. Why Leo Tolstoy wrote his masterpiece, War and Peace, about war 1812, not about war he fought in. He fought
Right.
in the War Crimea War, but
Right.
he wrote about that short stories, but not a novel. And he selected, someone could say, why do you write about something which happened in the beginning of 19th century,
Right.
not in the middle of
In
the
your
century?
grandfather's time.
And you, right. So why do you write about this? But he selected to write about that. And it became a masterpiece. So I'm not comparing you with Leo Tolstoy, but I'm just telling you that you have freedom to choose to write about any piece, and it still has value and interest and gives a broadened scope of understanding and horizons, our horizon of understanding of history, geography, whatever. And the problem is, and you're very wise that you show geography, because many people don't have clue where is what. And Americans are very bad about geography, very bad.
Yes, I've had several people look at the cover and say, why is there snow? Why are there mountains in Afghanistan? And you know, so that's why I like to you know, try and bring along as many people as possible along on the journey, and hope they enjoy the misadventures and enjoy learning a little bit about you know, what is still a fascinating country.
Okay.
Chris, you know what? I could not sleep maybe a week ago when I read a news on the north side that the people, some of the people, were selling their daughters for $2,000 because they don't have money to eat, and there is no NGO that can reach on the top of those mountains and caves that could feed them. So the winter is coming, snow is coming, they have nothing to eat. So when I read that news, I said, my God, in 21st century, people cannot feed their children and they're selling their children's.
Yep, we're you know, I'm sorry, and it's very real. Like, we're going to, unless the international community is willing to send in humanitarian aid, we're going to see a real crisis in the next few months. And we've already seen 500,000 Afghans displaced by the fighting in the summer. Who knows how many are going to have to try to leave to survive, and that's going to have ripple effects across the world. I was just last week in England giving a talk like this in the county of Kent, and the night before there was that disaster in the English Channel where refugees, including Afghans, nearly over more than 24 drowned trying to cross the English Channel in desperation to try and start a new life. And I think that really could just be the tip of the iceberg in what might be coming in the next year. So you're right, these people are survivors. They're going to try and survive, and if they have to, they'll do whatever they can. And you know, that's also tragically a reason that so many young men join rebellions, because they find someone who can pay them and provide them with a living, because they don't have any other economic alternative. And that's going to be a problem too, as the Taliban runs out of money.
But I hope that the Western media, instead of showing some happy things like, oh, we rescue women's football team, we rescue this. So instead of rescuing 10 people or 10 kids, okay, that's good that you're rescuing 10 kids. But if you portray the whole picture of Afghanistan, I think is a disaster, and people don't have a food even at one time for the whole day to eat. And
Right.
I think American is holding their $9 billion. And I don't know what Mr. Biden is thinking and what he was.
Well, I did see that a couple of weeks ago, some humanitarian aid was released, but it was I don't have the figure on my head, but what I recall is it was several $100 million worth. But I really, as you say, there is so much more that is needed. And as with almost all famines, because that's what we could be dealing with, is a famine, it's usually a question of distribution, not of supply. If people can't afford the fuel that's needed for the trucks to move the food around, the people in the remote areas in particular are going to be suffering. So but we saw the economy collapse under the Taliban in the 1990s as well, and the economic activity grinding to a standstill. And the other tragic irony is that the Taliban is more committed to eradicating opium production than any other Afghan government has been in the last 50 plus years. So that's another irony, where I don't know about New York, but what I've learned from Boston is that the price of heroin on the street has shot up since the fall of Kabul in August. So that's another consequence that we could be having problems with as well.
But in this case, Taliban is doing good thing, that they try to cut opium production,
Yes.
right? So I'm for that. I'm on the Taliban side. It's like people die by opioids crisis. So,
Yep.
so let prices go up for opium, and maybe
Yep.
less people die.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to take a value judgment on that one because it's just so complicated.
Yes, I agree. Okay, thank you so much for the. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. Any question?
Yeah, I think it was interesting seeing how you survived in the army like then and what went on in that country. It was interesting how it was going on then. I enjoyed the PowerPoint slides.
Thank you.
I
would just point out and that all that military, when I went to Afghanistan, I was pretty cocky that I was going to be fine. Felt that I was resilient. I was well informed. I had my military knowledge. I was well read about the what was going on in the country, but none of that can prepare you for war and just the terror and the horror of the real thing. You can read all the books you want, but and understand, the technical side of military affairs, but just encountering death so intimately is not something. It would be good if more people and policymakers could see it, and then they may make better decisions. But we have what we have.
Chris,
Yeah,
one
it's interesting. Thank you.
you know what, I was
you.
meeting someone and they told me, and that is true. They said that these Mujahideen, these Talibans, they don't wear clock. So that meaning is watch. So that meaning is that the American comes, Russians comes, they fight 9 to 5. They said we don't wear the watch, so we go 24 hours.
Well, the other saying in Afghanistan is that you have the watches, we have the time.
Yes.
Meaning their culture is resilient enough to outlast foreign invaders. But yeah, so we can only wish Afghans well, and hope that their country becomes more inclusive and just and prosperous. But it's a very difficult road ahead for them.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, someone else wanted to ask or say something?
And we're just hoping the success for Chris, his book, and I hope that people will buy his book and read the book and learn something out of it.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Shah.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's a good prompt for me to mention that there's the paperback, there's an ebook for Kindle, and an audio book that I recorded myself. If people like listening in the car.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also wish success to your book and your future projects or books that you're gonna write maybe in the future. So thank you for that you took your time and shared your knowledge with us. And I think it was very interesting and productive conversation, and we all learned something. And I will finish with that and stop our recording. And I don't know.
Liana.
Yeah. Yes,
Liana, I think this was a good topic. This was a good topic.
Absolutely.
But I'm a little bit disappointed of the attendance. I think that it looks like the American have no interest in this subject.
I don't know. Let me see. Okay, you know, what can I say? Americans do have interest, but people, we live in an age of information explosion, and it's very hard to attract attention when there's so many competing things going on. First of all, we're making this program in the afternoon. Many people work. Some people don't know. People are not technologically savvy, or some people don't speak good English. So it's like so many different things. So and as you know, sometimes promotion that's what determines the success of thing, and it's a job by itself. One thing is write a book, and another thing is like separate job to promote it.
Oh yeah.
Yes, and it's a lot of work about it. It's a huge undertaking. And as an author myself, I can only understand that. I understand Chris very well. It's just beginning of this book just started its journey because it's the beginning of the journey. So I hope success for this book, and it's book needed, and it's well written, of course. And so I just wish success to this book. And sometimes fate of the book is unpredictable. You can never know who is going to read and when and how it's going to influence. That's also one of the miracles of when you're writing books, because you write books, you never know how it's going to, in some remote part of the world, maybe someone would read it and would.
Exactly. Well, thank you all so much for the good wishes and for giving me your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You.
Tashakkur.
Yes.